So hi and welcome to another video, and today's a little bit different. Well, it's not different, we're still reviewing mice here, but today we're going to be taking a look at this 3D printed Logitech G305 modded mouse. Now I'm going to do some comparisons to the standard Logitech G305. This is a stock version running a AA battery, not a AAA battery mod. A few of you have asked me to do a weight modification on the G305 as well as the G Pro wireless, and they are coming. But today I want to show you something a little bit different, and this is a fully reshelled 305 PCB given to me by Twitter user, which is Mods Mouse. He's going to be selling these, so go check him out on Twitter. And he sent me this along because he wants me to run some of the tests that we normally do for mice, like force gauge tests, glide tests, because it's got some custom skates on it, and all the usual tests we go through. And we'll get a good idea whether it's worth you reshelling this or what the differences are if you wanted to do that. Now, if you've been following me, you know, but I've got a website, which is beardedbob.com. I've just migrated it to a new host because the one I was using was rubbish. And I've been doing some work on it. So there's a new voting system on there, which a lot of you have seen. So go check that out, as well as a request form. And I'm going to be updating all the content that I've been doing on YouTube on there throughout the next few weeks. So keep an eye out because it's definitely going to be changing quite a bit. So price-wise, as I said, at Mods Mouse on Twitter, hasn't given me a price yet. He's still working that out, but it's worth contacting him. So at the moment, I can't confirm that. But the differences in the design and shape we can take a look at here. And these are some of the differences that I've noticed. If you want to see what I thought of the G305, I'll put a link in the description, as I will do to all the content here and Twitter account for Mods Mouse. So we're not going to go through every bit of detail in the shape because I've already done that on the 305. But I'm going to tell you the differences here on the 3D printed shell here. One of the complaints people have on the 305 is the sloped sides, which slope a lot in at the bottom, making a little bit of a weird shape. And on this 3D printed shell, they're almost flat. There's a slight trim inwards at the bottom, but it's not as intense as the 305, and you'll see that when we take the measurements in a bit. It's also slightly narrower at the front by a few mil, and it's also got slightly smaller left and right mouse buttons here. But again, we'll see that in the measure ups here going forward. Stay tuned. The design, as you can see, is designed to be a lot lighter weight, so it's following things like what the final mouse edition's done and what Model O's done here, and cut out a honeycomb shape pattern across it here to reduce a lot of the weight without trying to compromise the feel for it. The version they've sent me here has rubber sides, which I've peeled off as well, so you can see the full shell. And the rubber sides are here to give it a bit more grip. Is it slippy like the G Pro wireless that I've had? With the rubber grips on, no, it's really, really grippy. He wants to keep the rubber a secret because that's part of his kind of like piece here, so I'm not going to go into any detail on the rubber or where it's from because I don't know. Once you take the rubber off, the sides are probably about as slippy as the 305 standard, so there's not much grip there. There's a bit of texture because of the way the 3D print works with the ridged lines, but if you get sweaty or wet hands, it's certainly going to slide around a little bit still. One of the other changes here is it no longer uses a AA battery or a AAA battery. This one is using a button battery, I'm going to call it. This is a prototype, and it's an early prototype, and speaking with the developer here, they've worked on a new rechargeable battery which is different to this version, so you might get something slightly different when you look to purchase it. The rear of the shell still comes off. I haven't taken it off yet, but you can take that off. But now that you don't need to change the battery, there's no real need for that. I'm going to be doing a teardown video, so hopefully you want to see that if you do hit the like button, so I can understand if you really want to see me tear this mouse down and we can see how it's built in the 3D model. It's got the same button configuration, a left and right mouse button, two side buttons, and a scroll wheel that's also activated for push down. One of the design changes here is there's no DPI button anymore. That's been removed, as you can see. You can still activate the DPI via a screwdriver or a little pin down the hole here. You can still see the switch, or you would do it within the software, which most people probably would. So here's how it looks in my hand shape-wise. I mean, you can see definitely the side changes here on the mouse. And other than that, you generally see the similar characteristics here within the shape of this 3D printed shell. So one thing people are going to be interested in is build quality and how well is it built. Well, the 305 we know is built really well. And the 3D printed shell is built well, but it is certainly still a little bit rough around the edges. Again, it is a prototype here, and it certainly could do with some refinement around the edges for making it a bit more smoother. Don't know how easy 3D printed plastic is to sand or something. You might want to consider doing that. It's still also quite fragile. You've got to be very careful with it. You certainly don't want to put too much pressure on it here. It does suffer from the same issue as the Model O mouse, where you can activate the switch on the left-hand side below the button if you push the side in. But again, like the Model O here, you're going to have to use some excessive force, and you're probably going to get RSI if you do that going forward. So it's not something you do while you're gaming, but again, it's got a little bit of flex in the sides. Other than that, there's no rattles, there's no squeaks. It's constructed well, and pretty impressive given this is a printed shell, to be fair. So although these are running the same Hero 12K sensor, I wanted to do a bit of a sensor test just to see more if it changes how I use the mouse in terms of like how I can control it. And I certainly found that the lighter version, this 3D printed one, or ultralight as he wants to call it, is easier to control in the sensor test. And you can see that where I've got a little bit more control on some of the tests here. I mean, the sensor still performs the same. It still wanders with rapid fire and up and down lifting, but you don't generally do that in games. And it's not different to many sensors here, but the actual control here, I felt it was easier to maneuver the mouse on these tests due to the additional reduction in the weight, which we'll go into in a bit. So what I want to also do is do the 3D aim test here, which I did. And I did the stock 305 and the 3D print, and they came out very similar scores here, to be fair. The 3D printed shell came in with a score of 57758, and the 305 stock came in with a score of 58576. What I did find was that, like I did with the Model O and some of the final mice, I found that I tend to overshoot on standard DPI 400 and CSGO settings. I don't change anything else in 3D aim, just purely because I want to test them as raw as I can. You can tweak it, but I want to just do that very raw and keep it so I can do it level across all the board here. I did find that I overshot a little bit with the lightweight one, but once you get used to it, I think you'll find it's a lot easier to control once you get used to that weight. And the 305 I found probably stopped slightly better, but that's because it's got a bit more friction on the feet, and I found it maybe a little bit easier to control slightly the 305 in a real kind of scenario rather than just sensor test. I think with a bit of time on the 3D printed shell, you get used to it, as I would do with the Model O, which I really like. I have the same issues because I've been using the G Pro wireless. So let's put the buttons through the force gauge test. I haven't done every mouse button here. I've just done the left and right button, in the middle, and the scroll wheel, just to see if there's any differences here. They do feel slightly different, but going over with the force gauge meter, you'll see that they're very similar. So what we do is we take 3 measurements in the position, and then I create the average, and then we'll use that going forward. As I've said, you can compare all these statistics on my beardedbob.com website. You certainly will be able to do it a lot easier very shortly. I've got some good ideas for it. If you want to understand if you like a lighter click or a harder click, and you can do that with different mice as well, with different switches. So chatting to @modsmouse on Twitter, he was saying that the switches are identical. He hasn't changed out any of those in these mice, so it's using the same PCB and the same switches, which is good to see. And the left middle mouse button on the 3D printer came in with a force of 84 grams. The left middle stock came with an average of 79 grams, so very similar. The right middle mouse on the 3D version came in at 73 grams, and the right middle version on the stock 305 came in at 74 grams. So as you can see, they are very similar in actuation force here still. The scroll wheels is where it differs, and on the 3D printed version, it's a lot shorter, the press, like really short, and it's also a little bit harder. And you saw this when we did the force gauge here. So the average for the 3D printed force pressing down the mouse wheel came in at 387 grams, which is quite high. It's quite a stiff press. And the stock 305 came in at 219 grams, which is probably a bit more around where most mice are. One of the things also to mention on the scroll wheel is that the way it scrolls is quite stiff, and that's probably because the 3D printed shell needs a bit more refinement, and which is they're working on it to try and get that going forward. So we certainly don't have any free scroll on this. It's certainly a little bit more restricted than on a 305 at the minute. The battery we've talked about, it's a button battery here. You can't change it for anything else. It's been modified to take this battery to reduce the weight. And the newer version is now rechargeable, which will be interesting to see. It'd be nice to see if it adds a bit more weight, because it might do with the additional USB port. So we'll have to perhaps get some information from the developer here to see how that's going to affect it going forward. So some of the things that people have been waiting for is the weight. Let's compare the weights here. So the 3D printed one with the grips on it, it's got the shell, it's got the battery in it. It comes in at 65 grams standard, which is light, given that the stock version comes in with a standard AA battery in it. Comes in at 98 grams. That's with a dongle not in it at the moment. So like for like here, there is a significant weight reduction there. Now, if you take the batteries out of both of these, the 3D printed one comes in at 63 grams, which means the battery is 2 grams. And the stock 305 comes in at 75 grams, because we know this has got a heavy AA battery. I'll put a link in the description to my other video where you can change it to a AAA battery, and I am going to do a proper weight reduction mod on the 305, so keep your eye out for that. If you remove the grips from the 3D printed and the battery, it comes in at 61 grams, which means that you're looking at more like 63 grams with the battery in it with the grips taken off. So again, pretty light really. So let's compare the sizes and the modifications to the shape, and then we'll go into the glide test as well. So the shape changes here. The length of the 3D printed is 116.5 millimeters, and the length of the stock was 116.4 millimeters, so very little change there. The rear width on the 3D printed is 55.7 and on the stock 55.3. So there's a little bit longer on the rear of the 3D printed here, a couple of mil, which I don't necessarily find as a bad thing to have a bit of extra length because the 305 can be a little bit short. One of the good things about 3D printed shells here is you could tailor a bigger shell here going forward. The mid-rear top measurement here on the 3D printed is 63.5 and the stock is 62.3, probably a millimeter in difference there as well. The bottom width on the 3D, 54.8 millimeters, and this is where the difference is. And on the stock, it's 49.9, so there's 5 mil difference there in width, which allows the 3D printed one to push the bottom out a bit to get rid of that sloped edge. The width from the front is similar. As I said, it's got slightly narrower front, the 3D one, and it comes in at 55.5 millimeters, and the width on the stock is 57.1 millimeters. The height on the rear of the 3D is, the back is 33.9 millimeters, and on the stock it's 34.2, so very similar. The mid height is 37 millimeters on the 3D printed and 37.8 millimeters on the stock. And on the front, the height is 21.6, and on the stock it's 21.5. Button width on the 3D is 18.7 millimeters, which we said has changed slightly narrower because the stock one is 21.5 millimeters. So moving on to the glide test here, and we take 3 measurements again per direction, and then we use the average here, which is what I'm going to show you to understand what the differences are. So if you're not familiar with the measurements, I go through here. The NSW is normal sideways movement. NFW is normal forwards movement. RSW is rotated the pad around for sideways, and RFW is rotated pad for forwards. The ones you want to be interested in are NFW and RSW, and that is the normal rotation of the pad. And that's what you would normally get when you're using it. And that is what the averages worked out on here. So the first measurement here with normal sideways is 13 grams for the 3D. And the stock one is 26 grams, which is quite a difference. The NFW here for the 3D is 21 grams. And the NFW for the stock is 32 grams. Again, some difference there. And certainly going to see that when you're on the pad. The RSW on the 3D came in at 19 grams. And the RSW on the stock came in at 31 grams. So again, a big difference, and that's certainly going to be noticeable on the pad when you're using it. The RFW on the 3D printed is 22 grams, and the RFW on the stock is 32 grams. So as you can see in the charts, the stock version has a lot more friction on the glide test than the 3D one here, and this is using some custom skates. So certainly definitely a benefit here with the weight reduction and the additional change of the skates. The 305 has always had a bit of an issue with having quite a lot of friction because of the thickness of the skates. So it's not one of my favorites for glide testing the 305, it's quite restricted. So the conclusion here while we wrap up is that the weight reduction here is certainly obvious. There's quite a lot of a weight reduction using the 3D printed shell. There was a little bit of a compromise, I think, in the feel of the mouse in terms of the way the 3D print texture is. Certainly maybe I want to sand it down or try and make it a bit smoother with a different print potentially. You're also going to get a slightly reduced battery life because of the difference in the sizes here, but that's not really an issue for me. And they're looking at a rechargeable version as well. The glide test shows that the stock version is certainly a lot slower than the 3D printed version. That's running its own skates and glides a lot better across the pad. Can't compare what the price difference is going to be, but the stock 305 at the moment, I think something like £35 on Amazon, which is a really good price. The normal price is £50 UK or $50. I don't think overall it improved my aim in any way, but it did feel nice from the hand. With the adjusted sides here, the 3D printed version, and I certainly enjoyed using it when I was playing Insurgency Sandstorm. So as always, hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments if you want me to do anything else, or put it on my Beardedbob website under the request video, and I'll see you all again soon. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.